everybody who's joined so far. My name is Katie Schwartz. I'm from FHI 360 and the Options Consortium. And I am joined by colleagues from McCann Global Health, Brianna Ferrigno and Sarah Vining, as well as from VITS RHI in Johannesburg, Elmarie Bradenhan. And we are all from the Options Consortium to provide the webinar today, Driving Demand for PrEP with the PrEP Communications Accelerator. Just to start off a little bit of what Options is, some of you may be familiar with the consortium already, but we are one of the 5 microbicide projects funded by the U.S. Agency for International Development in partnership with PEPFAR, working to accelerate and sustain access to antiretroviral-based HIV prevention products, collectively referred to as PrEP. So the consortium is led by FHI 360, AVAC, and VITS RHI. We have 6 other consortium members, including McCann Global Health, London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, Avenir Health, FSG, and LVCT Health in Kenya, and Pangea Zimbabwe AIDS Trust in Zimbabwe. So today's webinar will cover the topics of demand creation and specifically developing strategic demand creation campaigns. We will review the PrEP Communications Accelerator, which is a digital tool that Options launched in July of last year. And this was developed to support the development of demand creation campaigns for PrEP and other HIV prevention products. And then there will be discussion and Q&A at the end of the webinar. Our objectives for today are to familiarize you with the demand creation approach and how to apply it, to define the essential components of a demand creation campaign strategy, and to demonstrate how the PrEP Communications Accelerator can be applied to develop a demand creation campaign strategy. There will be time for discussion and questions at the end, as I mentioned, and we encourage everyone to enter questions in the chat box as they arise, and we can address those at the end of the webinar. As mentioned, it is *6 to mute your lines and *7 to unmute. So I will turn things over to my colleague, Brianna Ferrigno from McCann Global Health to talk through what we mean by demand creation. Go ahead, Bree.
Thanks so much, Katie. Well, hello, everyone. So we're going to start by diving in to a definition around demand creation. Before we do that, would like to read this quote that we'd like to start, ground our thinking in. Consumers everywhere, rich and poor, have hopes and aspirations. Tapping into those strong emotional sentiments and showing the consumer how the product helps them achieve their desires can be a powerful motivator for product use. So this was a quote in the USAID report, Idea to Impact, and it's really reinforcing the idea that we need to tap into people's hopes and dreams, and this can be an important motivator. Now, if we were to perhaps tweak this quote just a bit, we would have replaced the word consumers with people, because words are important and the word people is important. It connotes human beings with hopes, dreams, fears, and worries. Consumers is often a marketing term that speaks to a transaction rather than to meaningful communication. So the number one goal today of us talking about demand creation communications is to think about how we can tap into these human hopes, dreams, and how we can be authentic in doing that. So this will be essential to remembering when we go through developing demand creation strategies. Another quote we wanted to just root ourselves in is this one by the writer Emily Dickinson. The heart wants what it wants, or else it does not care. Here again, we're just reinforcing the notion of the power of human desires. So how do we tap into this? Well, we're going to talk about how we use an approach to strategic communications called demand creation. So So there's a lot of terms out there that help describe what we mean by demand creation. And there's a lot of processes and different methods that one can dive into. But ultimately, each of these terms have some essential components, which is that we want to understand our users so that we can make communications meaningful to them. When thinking about a demand creation definition, we like to use this one. A demand creation campaign uses strategic and creative communications that satisfies an emotional need of audiences rather than using functional or rational appeals. But that's not to say that rational appeals are not important. We know that over short term for campaigns, rational appeals combined with emotional appeals are effective. But when we're looking at longer-term communications, we see in this chart that emotional campaigns are more effective at high performance of your campaign. So our point is that for demand creation, it's more about making a product simply accessible. It's an important start, but not enough. What we want to do is make our products, and in this context we'll be talking about PrEP, but make our products famous, well-known, popular, desirable, and enviable. We want our consumers, our people, our end users to know about the product and be able to talk about it. But when we think about how this is often done through creative communications, a core point is that creativity and great design is not enough. It needs to be rooted in strategic thinking. So what we're going to get into throughout the course of this webinar is to talk about how we develop demand creation strategies for campaigns. But before we do that, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague Sarah, who will take us through a few real-world examples of demand creation campaigns.
Thanks, Bree. Okay, so the very first example, excuse me, that we're going to dive into is one that is close to home. It was a campaign that was launched in Chicago in the United States about PrEP. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you campaigns where they communicated from a rational point of view and then from an emotional point of view, and we can see the difference. So this is what they could have said had they communicated solely from a rational point of view. They could have said, "Are you ready for PrEP?" and told the facts, going straight to the point and telling us what PrEP is and what it does. The problem with this is that it's not terribly engaging. It may answer what PrEP does, but what it doesn't do, it doesn't answer the question about why people should consider taking it for themselves. If I don't know much about PrEP, or I know a little bit about it, and I have some fears and worries, my answer to the question, "Are you ready for PrEP?" might be no, and that would be the end of it. So here's what they did do. They launched a campaign called Feel the Tingle. And what they did is that they cleverly combined feeling words with disease words. And they communicated that with PrEP, you'll be able to feel all the feelings that comes with being intimate with someone while still avoiding HIV. They still clearly communicated what PrEP is. It's one pill that you take once a day, and it protects against HIV, but they did it in a way that is engaging and interesting and makes the reader want to learn more. And then they provided a site and a hotline where people could do that. So it isn't communication that's being pushed on people. It's saying, "Yeah, come with me." Let's look a little bit outside of the health world now. This is an example for a brand called Consol, which is a manufacturer of glass in South Africa. And here's what they could have said. Glass preserves taste and freshness. And in fact, they do communicate some of these points, but it's not all that they say. When they are first communicating to people, they do it from a much more emotional point of view. And they did it with a campaign that they called I've Arrived. And you can see by the imagery that it was classy and sophisticated, and it was designed to portray glass as a badge that makes a statement about the people who use it. Let's look at another example in South Africa. This is for Cadbury's chocolate. And if they were communicating solely from a rational point of view, and in fact they did communicate these points just decades ago, they would say there's a glass and a half of milk in every bar. But what they actually did to pull people in and to communicate from a much more emotional, from an emotional point of view, is they made this TV spot. And so if everyone can please press play to start your video and make sure that your sound is on your computer, and then I'll loop back.
I think people who are on their phones need to mute their phones if listening to the audio on the computer.
Okay, so I think even if you only caught a little bit of that ad, the point is clear that they made a delightfully emotional and happiness-inducing ad that communicated the joy that people can feel when they experience Cadbury's chocolate. And so they satisfied the higher emotional need in this ad of experiencing joy in our life. And if you're a human being, no matter who you are, no matter where you are, you want some joy. And that is why you would want to try some Cadbury's chocolate. So that's the main point I'm trying to make there. What we're saying with all of these examples isn't that informational and educational information is not important, especially with a product like PrEP, given that it's such a new category and people have fears and worries and questions about it. Information and education is still very important, but it's just not the only thing that matters. What demonstration does is that it gets people to overcome any barriers, fears, worries that they may have, to voluntarily find out more about PrEP. And that's where information and education becomes really useful. Okay, so we're going to do something completely new, and I'm going to completely switch gears here with an activity called What's Your Vision? And what I'd like people to do is to write a headline in a newspaper about successful uptake of PrEP in your area. So imagine that you've launched and you've created a demand creation campaign and it's been wildly successful. And as a result of the success, a very popular newspaper with a very high readership where you live is talking about how successful PrEP is in terms of many, many people using it and learning about it. So I'd like you to write down a headline in that newspaper. Think big. Think as big as you can and share the headline with us in the comment box. While you're starting to think about that headline, I'm going to give us one to get us started. So I'm just going to type it in the comment box. I'm South African, and so I'm imagining that I've just launched a very successful demand creation campaign, and this is the headline that is appearing in the Star newspaper in Johannesburg, which has a very high readership. Does anyone else have a headline that they'd like to type in? There we go. Thanks, Katie. PrEP works, and it's here. Amazing.
What's our vision?
There's another one. Women are leading the way with PrEP. That's awesome. Hundreds of thousands of new HIV infections prevented thanks to PrEP. Exactly. PrEP up, it works. Exactly. Wonderful. You can be prepped for anything. Oh yes, awesome. And PrEP makes love easier. Exactly. Awesome. Prepare, meet opportunity. PrEP works for SFW, yeah? Exactly. So I think we're getting the point. Demand creation campaigns can be really exciting. There's another one, no new HIV infections, PrEP it. Lots of us have an exciting vision of PrEP success. But how do we make this exciting vision a reality? How do we develop a communications campaign that satisfies an emotional need? We start with a demand creation strategy. But what is a demand creation strategy? Morris Chang, the founder and chairman of a Taiwanese semiconductor manufacturing company, said that without strategy, execution is aimless. In the context of communications, not having a strategy puts communications at risk of being incohesive, inconsistent, and disorganized. So let's define a demand creation campaign strategy. It's really a roadmap for demand creation communications. It outlines priorities to ensure that activities and outputs are coordinated and consistent to achieve predefined objectives. Let's run through some of the essential components of a demand creation campaign strategy. First, we have the objective at the very top here. That's basically a description of what you want the communications to achieve. For example, we could have a piece of communication or a campaign that needs to increase knowledge and understanding of what PrEP is, who it's for, and what it does. Next, we have the audience description, and this is basically the target audience that you're looking to speak to with the campaign. Be as specific as possible in this section, but only include relevant information. So some of the information that's usually included in this section is demographic information, the fact that here adolescent girls are in school and out of school, that the majority are still single but sexually active, that some are living with their parents or family, whereas others are living with their boyfriends, 10% are married. All of this information is hypothetical, but I think you might get the picture. You'll also include some insightful information, which I'll expand upon in a short while. The next section is called the problem statement, and this is basically the core problem that you're trying to address with the communication. And it's a description of what is keeping your audience from adopting the desired behavior. So here, for example, the problem statement is, AGYW want the freedom to make their own choices, but feel pressured to conform to the expectations of others. Next, we have the strategic idea. This is possibly the most important part of the strategy because it's the one thing that you want your audience to take away from the piece of communication. And it's the most powerful idea that can solve the problem that you've previously mentioned in the field above. So here the strategic idea in response to that problem statement was, PrEP gives you the power to live life your way without fear of HIV. The next section is the support, and these are reasons that help the audience believe in the strategic idea. You would usually include between 1 and 3 reasons. You don't want too many, otherwise your communications would be too heavily burdened with things that you're trying to tell people, and people can only take away a short amount of information at any one time. The example here is that people or AGYW can believe that PrEP gives them the power to live life their way because PrEP fits their life. So they get to go on living the way that they want. A strategy also includes channel recommendations. And these are basically a description of the places where you want to engage your audience. So depending on the campaign, depending on the objectives, depending on the amount of people that you want to reach, you would put the channels here in this section. So community radio, IPC activities, a TV spot if there's money for that, any other channel recommendations like that. And then last but not least, we have a field for considerations. And this could be anything else that you need the people who are going to be executing the campaign to keep in mind. You can also include mandatory things that need to be communicated within the campaign, such as for AGYW, what was relevant here is the fact that PrEP does not protect against STIs and pregnancy. Every one of these components matters, and they're all intended to work together. In fact, each of these components should build and tell a holistic story. And for the most part, each component should build off of the components that came before it. It does take a little practice, but once you do master the art of writing a strategy, you'll also be mastering the art of storytelling, which is now unanimously agreed upon to be a very useful and effective tool in communications. So diving a little bit more into a strategy and the function of it, a campaign strategy answers important questions like, what do you need to say? How are you going to say it? Who are you going to say it to? Where are you going to say it? And when are you going to say it? Campaign strategies should be insightful. Most importantly, I can't stress this point enough, because if they're insightful, they're going to be relevant, they're going to be appealing, and they're going to be motivating to the audience that the communication is speaking to. But what are insights, and what does insightful really mean? Insights are human truths, and what I mean when I say human truths is that there's something that is true about the person because they're a human being, no matter who they are or where they live. You'll know a human truth as soon as you read it because it'll spark something in you. I mean, literally in your heart. Human truths go to the heart of what it means to be human. And an example of a human truth is, you know, what I was talking about with the Cadbury's ad, the fact that we're looking for joy, or the fact that we look for belonging or self-acceptance. Big themes like that usually hit on a human truth. So how do we get to human truth? How do we get to human truth? Well, we ask questions like, what is their reality like? What have they stopped or started doing recently and why? What do they value? What are their ambitions? Who do they trust? Or who don't they trust? And you'll ask these questions through your market research or other methods. One of the most important and useful insights, though, is to identify what is stopping people from trying a product, service, or behavior. And this is the problem statement that I referred to when I was talking about the components of a demand creation campaign strategy earlier. The problem statement is insightful and or insight-driven because it's written from the point of view of the audience. The reason the problem statement can be so useful within a strategy is because it directly influences the strategic idea, which, as I mentioned, is one of the most important components in a strategy. The problem statement can, in fact, make or break a strategic idea. And I say this because the quality of the problem statement is directly proportional to the quality of the strategic idea. If your problem statement isn't that great, your strategic idea isn't going to be that great either. So let's just look a little bit more at how a problem statement can directly influence the strategic idea. There is a specific process that you'll go through, and this is described and expanded upon more fully in the Demand Creation 101 section of the PrEP Communications Accelerator. But there are at least 3, potentially 4 stages to go through when developing a strategic idea. The first involves synthesizing research into insights. And essentially what this is analyzing all your research findings and observations and then using them to develop insights. Insights aren't your findings repeated in the strategy. They actually go a step further. Findings only become insights when they're distilled down to a penetrating discovery that reveals an underlying need or motivation about the audience. If this is done really well, you'll find a useful leverage point for reaching people. The second stage involves writing the problem statement, and as I said earlier, this is the core problem that the communication needs to address. There are 3 best practices to keep in mind when writing the problem statement. The first is that you need to be sure that the problem is something that communications can actually solve. The problem is evidence-based. And thirdly, when you compare the problem to the objective of your communications, you just need to make sure that solving the problem will actually help achieve the desired end of the communication campaign overall. The third stage is to draft a strategic idea in response to the problem statement. If you have enough time and money, what we would recommend is to actually draft between 1 and 3 problem statements and between 1 and 3 strategic ideas, and then you would take those and you would test them with your audience. We did this with a project, we currently are doing it in a project in Kiambu, Kenya, and we didn't have a great level of confidence of what would work with AGYW in Kiambu. So what we decided to do is to draft 3 problem statements and 3 strategic ideas, and we put them in front of AGYW, and we don't have the results of that testing yet, but after this testing, we'll have a greater level of confidence of which strategic idea will be more motivating. So if there's time and money, that is something that we recommend doing. Okay, so let's look at a real-world example, and hopefully this will drive home some of the points that I'm talking about. This is a problem statement that we actually used in Kiambu, Kenya. We were talking in this case to AGYW and trying to get them to learn more about PrEP. And it was derived, I must say, from research that was housed on the Communications Accelerator. The problem statement in this case is that AGYW don't know any women who have tried PrEP, and so they don't know enough about it or trust it enough to find out if it's right for them. Again, we got this from research in the Accelerator, and what that research told us was that AGYW want to be socially accepted amongst their peer group, and if they don't know anyone who has tried PrEP before, then asking them to try it might be too big of a leap for them. So what we decided to say in the communications in this case was more and more women are protecting their bodies with PrEP, and of course this needs to be true. What the strategic idea does in response to that problem statement is that it tackles a social norm, and it gives AGYW social proof to consider PrEP. In this case, it also satisfies the higher emotional need of belonging. There are 3 best practices that I'd just like to reiterate before I pass it along to Elmarie when writing a demand creation campaign strategy. The first is that your communications need to be meaningful to the audience that you're speaking to, as I've mentioned. The second is that they need to appeal with, or empower, I should say. They need to empower your audience with positive, inclusive appeals. And then lastly, as much as you can, involve your audiences from the very start. This includes both your primary and your secondary audiences. When I say primary, I'm talking about the PrEP end users, so for example, AGYW, and then your secondary audiences would be people that influence AGYW. So that could be community elders or any other community influences that may be relevant in your specific context. And with that, I'd like to hand it over to Elmarie to talk a little bit more about the PrEP Communications Accelerator.
Thank you, Sarah. That's really kind of you, and thank you for the great presentation so far. So I wanted to say hello, everyone. And what we often hear here at Options is that demand creation is such a creative thing, and a lot of people seem to be overwhelmed by that. Well, today we want to tell you that creativity is really just intelligence that is having fun. And hopefully with the pointers that you've received in this webinar, and as well as this incredible tool, the PrEP Communications Accelerator that I'm about to show to you, you'll find that demand creation is really something that anybody can get into. And if you use the tool and if you use the resources that is available on the PrEP Communications Accelerator, you really have a professional partner in your pocket that's going to be there with you the whole way. So first of all, I'd like to just give you a small insight into what the PrEP Communications Accelerator is. We've mentioned that it's a digital tool. We've said that it's interactive. And what it is a tool that's based online. And it has a lot of resources. It's both information rich, but it's also really easy to navigate. And this tool is something that the Options Consortium have put together because we realized that there was a need for people to think through their demand creation actions and activities with strategy in mind, that we don't just go out there and start doing demand creation and it's not according to a plan that's going to give us the best possible impact and output. So it really is a tool that anybody can use. National governments, program implementers, health practitioners, social mobilizers, any staff that wants to create a message about PrEP, whether it's in their community or even on a greater scale than that. So it includes tested guidance for PrEP demand creation campaigns. Very important that this tool is a tested tool. And then it also gives aggregated research on target groups, so whether we're speaking to young people, whether we're speaking to women or to couples, it gives information that can be used when we think about what is important to the audience that we're trying to reach and what is it that they value. And then it also gives best practices for demand creation communications. So if you're worried that in the slides that you saw before from Bree and both Sarah, that you're going to forget something or that you're not sure that you're going to know how to apply all of that, then the accelerator is the place that you can go to have a look and get more comfortable with this kind of information. So the methodology used for the development, very important. As Options, we realized that there was a need for demand creation that is conducted in a strategic way. We know that demand creation works. If it's done in the correct way and if it's done with a strategy in mind, then it has the ability to reach so many different people in so many different settings with the channels that they prefer. So we started with a needs assessment and we interviewed a number of stakeholders across different African countries. We also spoke with US-based organizations and as well also ministry officials and government officials. From there, we could see what is the actual need that people on the ground out there need to help them with their demand creation. Next up, there was a communications landscaping and gap analysis. Very important. It looked at South Africa, Kenya, and Lesotho to get a bigger idea of what is available and what is needed. After that, we went into a phase of market research. There was 5 different target audiences, 530 participants in 6 different Kenyan counties. And this was really insightful. This helped us understand that if we're going to develop and create this tool, what is it that we need to put in there and what are the human truths for people out there. Then the big process of content development and testing started. So a lot of content was developed. As I mentioned, the tool is really information rich, but it is also user-friendly and really easy to navigate. So all of this content was tested and it's been reviewed, and we've asked different stakeholders and end users to give their feedback on this and adapt it accordingly. So enough about why we did it and how we came about doing it. I think it's important for us to now have a look at what does it look like and what can we do with it, and how is this going to make our lives easier and help us to reach more people with greater impact. So what you're seeing on your screen in front of you is the landing page of the PrEP Communications Accelerator. And if you look towards the top of the slide, you'll see that there is 5 buttons over there. There's an About the Accelerator, the Communications Fast Tracker, Demand Creation 101, Audience Profiles, and Audience Connections. You also have a big white button with orange text that says Get Started. So we're going to have a look at that, and if we click on that Get Started tool, what we're going to get to is a page that says to us, create your communication strategy or your demand creation strategy. And here is really where I want to encourage everybody to go to the PrEP Communications Accelerator. We will give you the address a little bit later on, and to go and play around with this and to create strategies and to see how this could work for you and what you would need the most. So the first thing we're going to do is choose the audience, and as you'll see, there's 6 audiences. So there's female sex workers, AGYW, people who inject drugs, and then the 3 other audiences beneath that. So what we're going to do here is, for instance, click on adolescent girls and young women. So as you see there, they are a little bit better shown. So we're clicking on adolescent girls and young women. So now that we've selected our audience, what we're going to do is to choose our setting. And this is basically, it doesn't really matter whether you're looking at creating demand creation activities or strategy just in your clinic or in a couple of clinics, or whether you're doing it for outreach and information sharing in your community, or whether you are looking at something a lot bigger on a national scale, trying to reach the entire country or just some counties or provinces. So what you're doing next is picking the setting that is going to be most appropriate for what you want to achieve. Once you've done that, you'll get to a place where you'll have a communication strategy. And what happens here is that in the Communications Fast Tracker, so the process we've just gone through, a communication strategy is populated based on the choices that you've made. So based on the audience that you selected that you wanted to reach, and based on the setting that you said where you wanted to reach your audience. And this is really a tool that's going to help you. And if you can see at the top there, there's a PDF download button. And if you open the website and you go and actually go through these actions, you'll see that an entire communication strategy is populated based on your choices. And if you scroll down, it's going to give you all the information about, about your audience, about the channels that you might use, about the research insights, their human truths, about what works in terms of connections and what the profile of the audience looks like. And if you prefer, you can click on the PDF download button and you can download that entire strategy and work with that to see, is this what's going to work in your setting? So it's very important. We do realize that even though the tool is really exhilarating and it's revolutionary and it's really making the process of creating demand creation strategies so much easier, it is important, as Sarah mentioned, that you really investigate this and interact with it and see if this is really going to work in your setting. And what's great about it is that if you have to adapt this, or if you have to pick parts of this that's going to work together best, you can do that. You can look at this and say, but maybe this isn't going to work in my setting. Maybe I just need to change this a little bit. And that's what you're going to figure out when you take the strategy and you take your strategic ideas and you test it with the audience that you want to reach. So I've said a lot about the Communications Fast Tracker. Basically, in a nutshell, you have the ability that if you want to create demand for PrEP, you can simply go to the Communications Fast Tracker, pick your audience, pick your settings, and have a communication strategy available that you can work with to guide all your demand creation implementation activities. Next up, I'd like to show you a little bit more about the audience profiles. This is, again, a really great function. So depending on which audience you're trying to reach, or if you're trying to reach all of them, you'll see that on the accelerator, you have these profiles. For instance, adolescent girls and young women, men who have sex with men. And if you go onto the website, you'll see that what you're seeing now in front of your screen is not all. When you click on one of these headings, it takes you to a very much more in-depth analysis and description and a complete profile of this audience. It tells you more about them. It gives you insights into which media channels is going to work best for your audience, what kind of messages resonate best with them, and a host of other informations that's really going to help you to connect with your audience and to understand the who that you're communicating with. Next up, I'd like to talk a little bit about audience connections. And as you'll see, again, this is the 5th button on the PrEP Communications Accelerator. So here we go into how do you connect with your audience? How do you make sure that what they receive from you is not just another message that gets lost between all of the noise? How do we make sure that the message we're giving from them that we've worked so hard on, that is positive and emotional, how do we make sure that message reaches the right intended audience? So if we look at settings, there's so many options to explore. You know, this is something that can take place in a clinic, for instance. It's something that when you do outreach in the community or provide services in your community with, for instance, a mobile clinic, demand creation has a place there as well. Whether it's, for instance, videos or TV adverts or a TV series that's being shown nationally, or even if it's you know, somebody using, as we mentioned earlier, IPC, interpersonal communication in a clinic or on an outreach, then this is really the settings. And this is where we see not just how do we reach young people or sex workers or MSM and with what do we reach them, but exactly where do we reach them best? Where do we have the best opportunity to get their interest and to make sure that we entertain and keep their interest with the information that we have in hand. Then in terms of channels, so when I just started out in demand creation, I used to get really confused between things like channels and settings and tactics. So what's great about the accelerator is that you can keep on referring back to it, and it'll say to you exactly what are the distinctions and how do we make those connections. So if we think about channels, there's so many different media channels. We live in such a diverse media society. We have mass media, whether this is a billboard that's placed nationally at different settings, or whether it's national radio or television, or even for, excuse me, or even social media the different channels that we use to reach people. It can be something as simple as a WhatsApp group that sends out messages to female sex workers, or it can be something as complex as a very strategic social media campaign that's trying to reach a specific audience in targeted areas. So I hope that makes it a little bit clearer, sort of the difference between settings and channels. This, again, if you click on the heading, it will take you into a lot more detail, and it will explain a lot more the different settings, the different channels that you can use, and how to use them best, and what the evidence and research says about this. So next up, what we'd like to do is to really refer you to the accelerator. What we also have on prepwatch.org, Accelerator Quick Start Guide. So if you feel that you need a little bit more help, or maybe some steps on how to use it and what's going to be available for you, this is a really short one-pager. It's a quick start guide. It's going to tell you exactly what to do and where to go. And you can find this by going to prepwatch.org. Then, finally, I'd like to say thank you for letting me share this incredible tool with you. If you do have any questions or need any kind of support, we're here to help you. You can use the email address that you're currently seeing on your screen to send any questions or comments, and we are available to help you, and we really want to encourage you to try and work with this tool and see how it can help you to make an impact with demand creation using a really strategic and well thought out approach. Before I move on and hand over to one of my colleagues, I just once again would like to show you, when we look at the accelerator, the digital interactive tool that's online, you'll see at the very top at your screen there, again, the 5 basic tools. So what you'll see there is, sorry, please excuse me, it's the wrong slide. So what you'll see there is that there's a lot of information on the first button about the accelerator, how it was created, what it can do, what it is, what it's not, and how you can use it in your organization. Then if you look, there's also a section, and I really want to highlight this, the Demand Creation 101 section. So if you've enjoyed everything that Sarah and Bree pointed out to you, and you were thinking, these examples are so creative, I just don't know how I'm going to get to that, then the Demand Creation 101 section is where you want to go and focus and look at this. Because this is really an online section that's going to help you understand, and it's going to teach you more about Demand Creation 101. And again, it's just that extra partner that you have that's right there beside you, and that's going to help you. So thank you very much for listening to me, and remember, creativity is just intelligence that's having fun. I would now like to hand over to my colleague Joseph, who is from Zimbabwe, and he'd like to share a little bit about his first-hand experience using the accelerator. Katie, maybe while we're waiting for Joseph, Joseph, so you can just interrupt me at any point if you're ready. I think one of the great things about the accelerator is that even if you feel that you're really comfortable with creating communication or demand creation strategies, this is still an exceptional tool. It really is a wonderful resource. Even if you have created a strategy document or have an approach in mind or have a fairly good idea of where you would want to go with your demand creation, you can still refer back to the accelerator. You can still look at the Demand Creation 101. You can look at the accelerator and the different phases in terms of developing a strategy and just cross-checking and making sure that what you have aligns and see if there's anything you've perhaps left out or something that you can benefit from. It's also a great tool for gathering that information and the research insights. It's all there, evidence-based information. So I think that's something that I want to encourage people to have a look as well. So whether you're starting from scratch and you feel a little bit overwhelmed, the accelerator is there for you. Or if you're fairly set in your communications and you're ready to roll, you can again have a look at it and just make sure that you haven't perhaps missed anything, or if there's perhaps a new setting or channel or tactic that you can tap into. Joseph, can you hear us?
No problem.
But my name is Jeff, and I'm from Zimbabwe. I'm with Idea Zimbabwe AIDS Trust, which is a local, the in-kind partner for options. I just want to briefly give you our experience in terms of using the Communications Accelerator in developing a national communication strategy. Yeah. And foremost, just to thank my colleagues and Elmari, what she basically described is pretty much the same with what went through as a country. Yeah. Just to give you a brief background, we started off with having national guidelines for PrEP, followed by developing a national implementation plan for PrEP. The last step they needed to go through was then to develop a communication strategy. So we engaged the National Takeover Working Group initially for PrEP, and after presenting an overview of the communications accelerator, the Takeover Working Group realized that this was in line with what they wanted for the country. So we developed our terms of reference for the development of the communication strategy with buy-in from the Technical Working Group in line with the communication, the accelerator. However, over time, the ministry then decided that we needed to shift from just a communication strategy for PrEP to a communication strategy for HIV prevention, care, and treatment, which was much broader than what we had initially planned. The good thing is the terms of reference and process in itself been changed and was still aligned with the accelerator. So just to describe the steps that we went through, and they are exactly the same with what Elmari described earlier on. We started off with the needs assessment, and for the needs assessment, we conducted the review. We conducted stakeholder consultations and key interviews. And that was then also followed up by landscaping the communications, trying to identify what has worked in the past and also where the gaps are. And this was across the whole spectrum of HIV care and treatment. And the next step was just to do the market research. So for this, we identified based on the progress, the gap, and also priorities for the country. We then identified a total of 13 audiences, and for each audience, we tried to do some analysis in terms of how they are interacting with the various programs, their communication, their aims, and then considerations, how they feel, how they think, what they say about the different programs, and also use that information to then develop journey maps for each of the audiences. And one of the key things that we did was to consult widely. So we had 4 group discussions with both positive and negative population groups for each of representing each of the audiences. So, for example, with HIV positive adolescent girls and young women, we also had focus group discussions with those that are negative. Those for men who have sex with men, male and female sex workers, transgender people, pregnant and lactating women, and based on that, we then developed journeys for each of the audiences and also archetypes. And in the discussions that we're having, we're also looking at preferences in terms of channels. We're also looking at various settings in which they access information about PrEP and the other HIV interventions. Once we're done with that, we then went on to do some analysis. And with the analysis, we then developed the communications. We prioritized the communications channels, and then we developed key messages. We developed key messages, and as highlighted by Elmari in the process, we then went on to test the messages. Yeah. So, and the testing was done in various settings, urban and rural settings, tertiary institutions, where each of these, each of the audiences that we selected are found. And then based on that, we then put everything together. So we now have a draft national HIV prevention, care, and treatment communication strategy, which we are hoping to launch early April, followed by the actual implementation, dissemination, and implementation. Yeah. So basically, I want to emphasize on a few points for those that are looking at developing communication strategies, not just for PrEP or for adolescent girls and young women. I want to highlight that it is possible, and as indicated by Elmari, the PrEP Accelerator is an easy-to-use and easily adaptable tool that you can use, and because of that, you need buy-in. You need buy-in from various stakeholders, so that includes the Ministry of Health. If you have a technical working group, if you have donors and implementing partners, you need buy-in, and if you present it, especially the human-centered design approach to it, it's easy to then get buy-in. And the steps towards developing a communication strategy are simple, and as highlighted in by Elmari, you can easily go through these processes and interacting with the various audiences as you're collecting the information, the data that you need to inform your strategy, also helps the process. And as you do that, it means you're developing a strategy that meets the different profiles or target populations. So if you're looking at adolescent girls and young women, it means if you go through this process, you are meeting them where they are found in their settings, and in the process you are developing key messages that they relate to, and you'll be using channels that that they also prefer. So it means over time you end up with a product that's tailor-made for the different audiences that you are targeting. So this is in what we've done in our experiences with the accelerator, and it's quite a user-friendly tool at both the national level as well as at sub-national level. And I would encourage anyone out there who wants to develop a strategy for PrEP, but also for any other HIV interventions. This is a tool that you can actually use. Thank you.
Thank you, Joseph. Okay, I wanted to open it up for questions. I think I'm hearing an echo. I apologize for that. But if people want to put questions in the chat monitor, or feel free to unmute your lines. I think most people are unmuted at this point. If you have any questions for Joseph or anyone from the options team, any of the speakers, please feel free. Well, as Joseph summarized, this tool has been used a bit in Zimbabwe to help with their process for developing the national communications strategy for HIV care, treatment, and prevention, using different aspects of the tool, across the different components that Elmarie outlined. And Options has worked with some partners in Lesotho to use the tool as well for some programmatic demand creation efforts in PrEP. And while the tool is not necessarily intended to be the standalone resource for campaign development, it can be, but it's really intended to serve as a launching point for these efforts, using any or as many of the different resources that it has, whether it's building insights or looking at full audience profiles, getting ideas of different channels or tactics to use to reach the intended audience. There's a number of different ways this tool can be used, and it's really developed to put out there as a resource to help expedite the work in this area.
Yeah, Katie, I think what you said is so important, and I again want to encourage people to go to the accelerator that is on PrEP Watch, and specifically if you look at the Demand Creation 101 session, what's recently been done is Options developed a number of videos of people explaining how they've used demand creation, what it means to them, how important insight generation is. So you can have a look at those videos, and it's really going to give you, in a short sort of slot, it's going to just help you wrap your head around these things. Or if you're a demand creation professional that's really good at what you do, then it's going to be great to look at these videos and just get that affirmation again. And it's also quite nice because you'll be able to see some of the presenters that presented today in the videos. Perhaps if anybody has questions on how to use the Communications Fast Tracker, or if they have any concerns or doubts going into it, please feel free to ask. We'll do our best to answer and help you and guide you through this.
I'm also adding in the chat box now a manuscript we wrote just about the background of the tool and the methodology for the tool if people are interested in that. And I can include a link in the chat monitor as well to the videos that Elmarie was just referencing as well. I think we have a couple of questions in the chat monitor. Can we have different materials for enrollment on communication for PrEP and also on retention? The big problem is retention. So that's a great question. So we want to not only create demand and build awareness of PrEP as a new prevention option and create demand to increase uptake and initiation on PrEP, but also to encourage continued use of PrEP for as long as the person is at risk for HIV. Bree or Sarah, do you want to say a little bit about how the tool can be used to support continued use of PrEP?
Yeah, Katie, this is Sarah. I can help answer that question. So demand creation as an approach can be used for either. So as you mentioned, your objective of your communications can be for awareness and to get people to learn about PrEP. But say now people already know about PrEP, and now what we want people to do is actually stay and be retained. And so that will be the objective of the communications. You'll use a demand creation campaign strategy and you'll craft it with that objective in mind. And it's still important to, I mean, as human beings, we are inherently emotional. We still need to be reminded about why something is important to us or how it can play a continued and meaningful role in our lives. And so that's what a demand creation campaign can do. And in that way, it can help to achieve the objective of keeping people on PrEP. So I hope that's clear, but the main point that I'd like people to take away is that you would just draft your objective of your communications campaign depending on whether people know about PrEP or whether you want them to actually stay on PrEP. And the demand creation approach can be used in both instances.
Yeah, and I think maybe to add to that as well, totally agree with what Sarah said, is that if you have a solid strategy for your demand creation that is based on research insights that looks at positivity and that emotional connection that you have with your audience, you can take that theme throughout your materials and your communication channels and apply that, and also use that for positive in terms of retention. And this could take the shape of many different things. It could be daily reminders that are based in positivity and reminding the end user why they initiated on PrEP. It could be something like a printed adherence card. It can be social media posts, anything that's going to work in your setting for your audience. And I think it's important as communicators within the public health sector to remember that we're not just communicating to create awareness and uptake of a product. We're also communicating to really try and focus on inspiring people to continue with positive behaviors. And our approach and the products that we put out there should also have a focus on that.
Thanks. And I also wanted to add that the accelerator is a tool that's really used for campaign development and the use of media and in building demand and creating demand for PrEP, but it should be integrated into a larger demand creation approach that would be used for programmatic purposes as well, that would encompass all these other aspects in terms of engagement of providers and community outreach workers and the community engagement aspect of demand creation and communications as well. So this is primarily focused on really that campaign and media aspect and interpersonal communications to some extent as well. There is another question. It seems you are proposing a do-it-yourself model. How do specialists in this area, such as behavioral economists, ad agencies, and strategic communications advisors, fit in? And that's a great question. The tool helps develop the strategy for the communications campaign, but it does not develop the creative. So certainly creative agencies would be critical in helping create that, the visual, the messaging, the what that campaign looks like from a creative element. Bree, Sarah, and Elmarie, you likely have more to add, but as I mentioned earlier, it's really a springboard to get started in idea generation, and it's also very helpful if there isn't a lot of time or money or resources to invest in the process, so that people can do it themselves a bit more easily if the option for specialists in engaging a lot of different players isn't there.
Yeah, I think that's the important part, Katie, that you just mentioned as well, is that, I mean, looking at the needs assessment that was done for it as well, and focusing on looking at, you know, it might be that you're in a situation where you don't necessarily have a lot of resources or a lot of human capacity around you to do something like this really quickly to answer a need that's there. And then the accelerator is an excellent springboard for that. So the idea is not to cut anybody out. To a certain extent, there is a lot of things that people can do themselves, but as Katie said, it is a springboard. And it really helps people when there's low resources for this kind of thing to give their PrEP implementation a fantastic demand creation platform.
Yeah, so for example, there is a lot of research that has been summarized and presented in the tool across a lot of different countries, across 5 different target audiences for PrEP. And so if there isn't the time or finances available to carry out country-specific or location-specific human-centered design research, market intelligence, to guide that strategy development process and understand what those gaps are, there are a lot of that research is already there, and we have presented the tool in a similar presentation to a number of countries at the Options Learning Collaborative last September, and people from, we had 8 different countries in sub-Saharan Africa present, people reading through the audience profiles and reading through the strategies that were produced really felt like what was stated there very much resonated within their countries and found that it was very relevant, even though the research and the information used to develop those strategies was pulled from many different countries. So that's where, you know, if there isn't time to do location-specific research, taking what's in the accelerator and testing components of it locally may be a more efficient way that you can do that. If time or money is of concern. Sorry, go ahead, Bree.
Oh, no. Sorry to interrupt. Just one thing to mention, in the tools and templates section of the accelerator, there are tools on how to write a brief for a creative agency. There will be new templates on writing RFPs, requests for proposals to engage with creative agencies, to engage with market research firms. This is in no way meant to replace the expertise that comes from the market research, from media buying, from creative agencies. Being a representative of a creative agency myself, we do want to acknowledge the role that professionals have in developing marketing and demand creation campaigns. That said, in terms of building capacity of what the process looks like, and also, as Katie was mentioning, in terms of time and resources, how can we springboard those actions and support to make sure that we're developing strategically driven demand creation efforts.
Thanks, Bree. I don't know if there's any other follow-up thoughts or questions based on the current discussion, or if anybody has other questions to add. Okay, well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining. I believe the slide deck was circulated in the most recent reminder that went out this morning, but we can, the webinar has been recorded and will be available as well for people who weren't able to stay for the whole meeting. So great, thank you everybody for joining, and we can also circulate a follow-up email with the tools and resources mentioned, as well as the link to the webinar when that is publicly available as well. So thanks everybody, and have a great rest of your day.